plates heavy enough to deflect small arms fire, comprising an assemblage of foliate etchings bursting with vibrant rococo details cut in a monochrome gray that made the blooms appear lifeless and wilting. A contemporary biologist would find little recognizable in those haphazardly arranged petals and sepals, much less the asymmetrically bewinged beetles bustling before them. It was as if those ill-begotten botanicals and their pollinators had been conceived for a medieval bestiary based on second-hand descriptions of some dark continent. I knew all of this and more because I had traced each and every incised line uncounted times over the course of an interminable confinement. Though retaining no conscious recollection of my ordeal, I could feel the phantom touch of those familiar grooves lingering on my fingertips and knew by heart the full spectrum of shapes they formed. At length, I came to recognize that sterile garden for the means to some forsaken end, a pale shadow of its maker's ultimate intent, and realized that I had to leave the comforts of my hermitage somehow, some way, that night or day, for it was impossible to distinguish one from the other. In the eternal sourceless twilight, I was visited by a dream, just the one, a confabulation entirely of my own making, offered as cold comfort before it was plucked from my brain like a ripened fruit, along with all other idle flights of fancy. You may think it a nightmare, but to me it was as the sweetest of one-iric delicacies. It began mid-stride. I found myself running hell for leather through a maze of mirrored glass in mortal terror of something I had no wish to know. I was not alone in this enterprise, but in my frantic state the other fleeing forms seemed little more than obstacles to be thrown down and overcome. I felt no trickle of remorse for leaving them to the unknowable doom nipping at my heels. So it went until I had run an entire lifetime through, and my path came to its inevitable terminus in a cherubic figure that I had neither the means nor the will to overthrow. Her arms were splayed and downcast like a mother's welcoming embrace, but the bloodless flesh shone off-white and salmon where it had been slashed from the inner wrist to the elbow crooks. I saw something of myself reflected in her, and as it reflected back onto me, I opened a vein in my wrist with a jagged fingernail. I held my clenched fist outstretched as if waiting for the proper moment to let go of some dear keepsake, but a trickle of sand fell from my open wound. In place of blood, I looked to the angel imploring, and she uncurled my fingers, twining them with her own bloodless vestiges, so our open palms touched for the first time in an eternity. Then she turned my wrist heavenward, and I watched in horror as the stream of sand turned with it, drifting lazily back into my hollowed arteries as if the wound was caught up in its own field of gravity. Unable to continue my desperate flight, I turned to face the nameless horror following in my wake, the shadow shackled to my ankles of a stooped and withered crone. It was like a me-shaped hole in the world through which I could see the boundless potential afforded by the prospect of my own absence, a utopia facilitated by my total erasure. With this final blow, my weary legs gave out beneath me, and I found myself falling, no slying, through the inky depths of a pit perfectly tailored to my misshapen form. The kindest and the cruelest thing was that when I fell alone. In the moment, it seemed only just and right that I should be devoured to sustain the alien delights of that pristine void, euphoric beyond my comprehension. I sunk through the yawning depths of nothingness, though it seemed another eternity, until a sliver of sunlight, deprived of all warmth by a chill breeze, ghosted across my sleeping face. I shuddered at the prospect of returning to the tedium of a caged existence, having nowhere to run and nowhere even to fall. A laughable concern in retrospect. The aimless door had been opened for me, and for a blissful moment I immersed myself in the gentle caress of winds laden with scent of propagal and sound of glossolalia, a cacophony of sensation too long absent from my life. If living it could be called, hungry to glean some understanding of that structure which had birthed me back into the broken world, I stepped forth and studied the corrugated steel threshold for any signs or symbols through the charred paint and frozen embers that clung tick-like to the edifice of my former refuge. I discerned a set of characters scrawled in broken black letter, labeling the complex Schlafhof. It seemed a terrible sort of inversion that a slaughterhouse should be the only place fit quiet reflection was disrupted when two men followed me from out of the darkness, bidden by some undeniable calling or ultimatum. We quickly established the shared nature of our distress, made frantic by some half-remembered semblance of normality. Were we to be pilgrims or sacrifices? Perhaps we had simply been declared caput lupinum, exiles without the protections of Leviathan's law. I took heart in this latter possibility, for there could be no worthy offering in the profane blood of those deemed homo sacer. With no further answers forthcoming, we wasted no time deliberating over where to go next. In mutual recognition of the sole path laid out before us, every door, window, and side street had been boarded shut, as if in dread of some pestilence. We encountered no living souls amidst the city's ruins, yet the walls of homes and storefronts were everywhere alive with charred silhouettes like a shadow play left abandoned by its puppeteer. The departed townsfolk were immortalized in these forgotten frescoes, their scorched shades entangled in synthetic smoke webs like flies ensnared by a spider. In a fit of whimsy, I wondered if perhaps we too were no more than shadows on a screen, for we did not walk so much as glide unclean spirits out of the mouth of the dragon, dead-eyed yet searching for meaning. As I knew not how to make polite introduction, I settled for wordlessly scrutinizing the appearance and manners of the two men as we made our way down the ruined avenue. The eldest member of our ragged party appeared to have done his futile best to keep up appearances through our long confinement, caparisoned as he was in tattered velveteen robes dyed a faded Tyrian purple. He bore also a signet ring engraved with the crancelin of Saxony suspended from a chain about his neck like the albatross of some accursed sailor. In contrast to my own unkempt frizz, he had maintained a Caesar cut and a clean-shaven jaw which might have conveyed strength in better days. It seemed to me that there was a rare intelligence in the wolfish eyes of that aged firebrand, like embers still smoldering within the sunken taper marks of his burnt-out face. I felt a sort of estranged sentimentality towards him, though I could not say whether this was due to some natural charisma of his or some buried memory of mine. If he himself knew which was the case, he neglected to divulge such precious information, and indeed looked more to our other companion than to me. In appearance, my fellow travelers shared only the echoes of better days. The drifter, for so the younger of my companions appeared to me, wore an aviator's sterling jacket patched with scraps of fur and wallet leather over worn fatigues, a Solingen bayonet rested half submerged in an ill-fitting scabbard at his side, with a double row of scaling sawteeth opposite, a broad-cutting edge tempered in brine and quicksilver glimmering darkly beneath the russet veneer. His face too was lost in a soot-stained cloud of white beneath the grime. His hair might have been a dirty blonde or silver gray, and his skin was marked with thin scars, uneven and layered, seeming to entwine and part in places like sprigs of ivy or bisected worms. Whether he was closer in age to our elder companion or myself, I could not presume to guess. He regarded us both with the same haughty indifference. For my part, I could scarcely judge either man's attire, clad as I was in a buckled suit of heavy canvas resembling the sort of garment used to restrain lunatics in the asylums of old. A motley crew we made, dressed in the draperies of fools, bedlams, and outlanders, yet I was glad of the gaucherie, for beyond this distinctive dress, the only memento I had to ground my identity was an orrowing memory of mirrored smiles, seemingly indistinguishable in every aspect, though I had the distinct sense, unshakable as it was inexplicable, that they were different as any two things could be. For in the more officious of those singular smiles, the course of empires was written larger than life, as if in parody of the neoclassicist's lurid brush. The teeth were entirely too pale, like statuary stripped of all humanizing pigments, fragmented memories worn bare of any virtuous character by crashing waves of relentless sentiment. Our journey was no less plodding once we reached the countryside, though the scenery became somewhat less bleak. Where once we had been hemmed in by towering walls of fire-blackened brick, now our path was lined on either side by hedges of pale primroses, desperately reaching out for the one gray light of winter. These unseasonable bouquets, springtime visions of blooming aberration, had erupted from frozen ground as the resultant super bloom of some calamity beyond recall or reckoning.
I caught sight of my elder companion, caressing the flowers at the edge of my vision, much as a gardener might the labor of his love. Yet I also noted his palms were left bloodied by the gesture. It was only then I realized there were other stranger flowers interspersed amongst the primroses, more befitting the ravings of the Voynich manuscript than waking visions. Though every color of the rainbow was represented therein, the hedges flashed especially with blooms of azure, that rara avis most esteemed by the old romantics, as if the clouds overlooking this perilous Eden watered the earth with indigo ink, which seeps through the cracked bark of grasping roots to pollute their innermost tissue with honeyed words. The further we walked, the more I became convinced that the interwoven branches of the hedges abided by an unnatural pattern like a basket weave, but infinitely more nuanced. The effect was too subtle, too patiently meticulous, to be the work of any mortal topiary, yet also too conspicuous to have emerged organically. Of all things familiar and mundane, I thought it most resembled a floral wallpaper. Through long hours we marched, never encountering a single fork or crossroad. Even so, the trail was so bedeviled by winding switchbacks that I began to wonder if we had wandered into a maze of a scope incomprehensible. The others trudged on, dutifully unquestioning, as lab rats conditioned to walk the unending labyrinth, but I could not help attempting to make sense of the Bashkian landscape. The more exotic flora remained quite beyond my understanding, but I observed that our path was paved in a checkerboard of rainbow obsidian and diamond-flecked suvite, suggesting the presence of volcanic and meteoric catastrophes in the primordial oblivion of that adventitious landscape. I could derive nothing of use from this epiphany, save a dawning realization that I retained a more than passing familiarity with the elements of the earth. A resplendent quetzal materialized from on high, offering sweet confirmation that closer cousins than trees and shrubs remained amongst the living. We treasured that moment, expecting it to be fleeting, but even the songbird seemed to acknowledge no reality outside our cloistered path, and so remained humming overhead for some time before alighting upon the decaying hollow of a worm-eaten stump ensnared within the hedges. The drifter peered inside, but the songbird paid him no mind, being entirely preoccupied with expending hard-earned rations of snail and laurel into the neon-bright ampoules of a vomitorium wrought in uranium glass, whilst a brace of mossy green fledglings already half withered away into shivering mummies attempted to peck each other to death for some droplet of scarlet sustenance. With infantile curiosity, the drifter plucked a sloshing vial from the nest, heedless of those supernormal stimuli which are the inbuilt levers of societal decadence and decline. The songbird whirled on him in a tower of talons only to be broken in a clenched fist, devolving into a mess of seeping blood and splintered bone upon which its true-born offspring greedily sucked. Shaking the last scraps from his sullied hands with an expression of abject disgust, the drifter rejoined our party, and we continued on in search of a more substantive meal, lest we turn upon one another in the manner of starved beasts. Sometime after the silence became stifling, the gray eminence, our esteemed elder, began singing a lied for us to march to. I was too immersed in my own thoughts to take note of much beyond the mellifluousness of the melody. But in retrospect, I believe the ballad was an improvised composition based upon Parzival, the magnum opus of medieval knight poet Wolfram of Eschenbach. When this tune inevitably grew tired, the drifter commenced a marching song of his own, opting for a surprisingly rousing rendition of the more readily recognizable folk song Die Gedanken sind frei, that too trailed off when its grizzled vocalist stooped to pluck a sprig of withered edelweiss from a gap between the flagstones. Obliged to offer some tribute of my own, I decided to serenade my comrades with La Belladone sans merci, the only rhyme I could recite with any sort of confidence, but I fell silent in due course as the drifter cautioned me with a raised hand. We had approached a pair of serpents, cold-blooded survivors more miraculous than ourselves, twining their way through vibrant heather as if consumed by some infernal ecstasy, their black and gold scales seeming to drink in the sun's faltering glow. It seemed my brooding acquaintance mistook those grass snakes for vipers, for he skewered them each in turn, cutting free the sweet meat and flinging the remains into that wild yonder which lurked beyond the hedgerows. Though, as I would soon learn, a sickly remnant of the person he had once been still longed to cut tongues from the mouths of adders, that their venom might drip voicelessly and so ensure the mutual destruction of vipers and men. In anticipation of nightfall, we opted to settle beside a boundary stone delicately engraved with the image of a Carolingian Lipari, rendered as if in mockery of Lady Justice. She wore no blindfold, but rather the crested helm of a gladiatrix, and in place of sword and scales she bore a falconer's dispatch spike alongside a trap of runic form known as a wolf santal, its double-sided hook dangling by means of a chain from the curled crosspiece in her fist. "This stone looks old," I observed. "Aren't all stones?" the drifter drawled. "Perhaps repurposed from the Roman lines, or older still, plundered from some heathen Opferstein," the old man offered, in marring the interjection. We needed no balefire to see, for the sky was lit by more than our moon and stars. By day the heavens held a vaguely iridescent tint like the fragile film of a soap bubble, but at night they shone like a rainbow bridge, the auroral spawn of a massive explosion in space frozen in time by some yet greater force of will. It was as if the sun's light never set in that place, but rather split into a spectrum of tortured color only to convalesce once more. Come the dawn, the leafy foliage glittered with lambent viridescence, and everywhere tenebrescent blooms were painted in the myriad hues of light dismantled. As the rainbows twisted and contorted overhead, it occurred to me that most spectra may be more akin to broken circles. Empathy is just a hop and a skip away from savagery, just as genius is from lunacy. The drifter's detached disposition changed markedly as dusk completed its descent. He began to seek out and uproot strange herbs with the frenetic fervor of a caged beast. I watched silently as he set about brewing a black broth from his brace of vanquished vipers, kykeum spiced with a harvest of snake plant and henbane. Only then did I become conscious of the emptiness which gnawed at my belly and the cold that seemed to compound it. Against my better judgment, I accepted the dregs he proffered. There was a sort of hunger that gnaws at the mind for want of more savory meat. Wearied by our travails, we made no further conversation that night, but swiftly drifted into slumber. If I did not know better, I would say that I am dreaming still. In truth, my rest that night was fitful, disturbed by the sounds of a wilderness alive with those crepuscular nightmares which circumvent more lucid hours. At one point, caught in a limbo between dream and wakefulness, I heard an unintelligible muttering and thought I spied encroaching vines slithering from out the hedges, their foliate tendrils terminating not in flowering fruit, but faces grotesque with verdant stems spliced into dead arteries like some romaine arabesque-made flesh. At first their teeth gnashed mutely in the night air without the lungs to power a snaw, but when an east wind swept through their leaves and hollow stalks, they began to sing familiar laments from Dee's eerie to a like-wake dirge, the melodies recognizable though their key had been inverted so as to seem warmly inviting, baiting me to venture beyond the emerald veil into the embrace of their velvet threnodies. All too soon, the intrusion of a distinctly feminine voice roused me from my absurd reverie of dreams dramatic. What have we here? The interloper's cadence was more self-assured than we had cause to expect in that nauseating wonderland, and with its introduction my hysteria melted into hilarity, as is the wont of nightmares dragged into the cold light of morning.
Bleary-eyed, eyed, and panicked as any animal out of its element, I scrambled to my feet, only for the sight of her to steal the breath from my lungs. A head of cascading bronze ringlets formed a blazing cone around the pallid face with thin lips and steely gray eyes. There was a hardness to her features that bespoke something of the figure on high in Dore's destruction of Leviathan, and something ineffably unnatural also, as if her form refused to abide by the golden ratio, or Benford's law, being a patchwork of parts made in parallel. Yet for all that, she appeared to me fair and cold as Omeridon's bride, a vision made manifest from deeply rooted fantasies I could scarcely recall. How the others regarded her I cannot begin to speculate. Her mouth never moved, and judging by the very timing of our reactions, we had heard different words escape her pursed lips. This fluid affectation should have been unnerving, but in her presence it could be described as nothing but inevitable. A pilgrimage, I answered at length, though I had already half forgotten the question. She paid this no mind, drawing a serrated ball-line knife from her sleeve to dead head, a patch of withered blossoms conveniently clustered in thursic inflorescence, leaving only the most garish to struggle on in solitude. trace the impossibly recursive denticulations of that scarlet edge spiraling down to some quantum abyss. It seemed too fine a blade for guarded work, banded with hair-thin annuli across its entire surface like a patterned saber out of those crucibles most prized in ancient Damascus. Though I did not yet have cause to know it, Rochelle was the name of that fractal-toothed instrument, and its poison bite reverberated throughout the panoply of possibility. Only when all trace of imperfection had been cleansed did the mysterious stranger stow her blade and turn to face us once more, extending her hands in a gesture of welcome. The lines of her palms were dirtied by what I thought might have been faded rust or dried blood, lending them a cracked appearance not unlike the crazing of antique porcelain. Scientist, survivor, sovereign, the lady countered, glancing at us each in turn, such diversity of misguided convictions. Yet I am not one to deny the time-honored rites of hospitality. Follow, if you please. A gap materialized in the hedges, just behind the lady's luminous form, chimerical foliage shrinking away from her radiance in apparent defiance of its basest nature. It seemed I had erred in taking the inescapability of our path for gospel, yet I felt reassured in my heart of hearts that she had come like some bright eidolon to save us from ourselves. We were helplessly compelled to follow once bidden by her numinal splendor, the drifter alone making it a protest. Every angel is terrifying. Don't you know why they are made of light? He was pleading with us, but we shook our heads. It is so their prey on the ground will see neither shadow nor silhouette of impending doom. The elder and I scoffed at this, and perhaps the drifter had had his fill of lonesome wanderings, for he begrudgingly retracted his concerns. With that momentary lapse into heresy put to rest, we set out after our newfound guide like moths to flame. Bypassing the primroses in her dread wake, we traced a game trail through rolling terrain, winding our way through orchards of a strikingly tropical character, all slim stalks and flowing fronds overhung with clustered panicles of a packet of appearing heads of rapacious rabble at the scene of a disaster. Like the woven weft of our former enclosure, the arrangement of these alien trees was too irregular to bear any resemblance to conventional agriculture or untamed growth, but instead seemed imbued with some unfathomable design. Noticing my interest, the drifter nudged my shoulder, gesturing back and forth between the greenery and the dawn-red sky. With a knowing twinkle in his eyes, I took this for an intimation that whatever pattern the orchard abided by might only be fully appreciated from the air. Though we were so unacculturated to one another's company, it was difficult to say with any kind of certainty what he had intended to convey so obliquely. "Who are you? Were you one of us?" That rough, hewn survivalist proceeded to prevail upon our Pathfinder. I was beginning to suspect he had more grit than sense, but she indulged him all the same. "You may know me as Verity to understand. All is to imagine nothing. As wonder died when dragons disappeared from your maps, I would have a tale or two from each of you." For his part, my elder acquaintance seemed oddly preoccupied with something to our rear. I followed his gaze, but beyond those uncanny orchards, there was naught to see save an unbroken wall of flourishing hedges extending past the horizon. Yet even as I took stock of the path I had tread, the ground behind us began to shift and bubble, caught in a landslide unhindered by gravity's constraints. Our own boot prints seemed to ooze like running ink, merging into a trail of slime such as snails have been known to leave in their lumbering wake when left unsalted. "Where are we?" the old man asked our guide. His once dignified bearing now collapsed into a tensed hunch. The principalities of Germania, you have come from the crown estate of Villa in Goldestadt, which the ignorant call the city of shadows. I will host you at the Villa Hinterkaifeck, and on those consecrated grounds, hear all you have to say. This reply prompted more questions than it provided answers, but I thought better of asking what crown claimed dominion over the aforementioned principalities, or how she expected us to traverse such distances on foot. I could not then comprehend the non-Euclidean geometry of her royal road, which enabled one of sound vision to cut across universes as readily as rounding a corner. Hopping over a bed of leafy mandragora rosettes with my gaze downturned, I caught a glimpse of the distant Teufelsmoor passing us by in a blur of motion, with only a flickering of siren lights in my peripheral vision to mark the occasion that should have brought us near the ruins of the lines Germanicus, though we never caught sight of them. It was disconcerting, to be sure, but I was not half so troubled by the geographical impossibilities of our charted course as I was by the nonsensical caprice of my own memory, recalling the precise location of an ancient monument while helplessly fumbling to piece together the fundamentals of my own personal history. Retrieving even the simplest details from the looted bank of my mind proved a Sisyphean task, like grasping for splinters in my brain only for them to worm their way deeper into the fold. I roused myself from these fruitless ruminations as a grassy hillock came to dominate the landscape, its pinnacle crowned by a great vine-throttled oak with grasping branches outstretched in a tantalizing offer of shade from the ubiquitous glow of our broken skies. The more I studied that earthen acropolis, the more I came to suspect that it was a kind of artificial namaton raised by pagan peoples as tribute to some forgotten god, for its gentle curves seemed altogether too symmetrical to be the work of winds and rains and shifting snows alone, yet remained well within reach of blind zealotry. As we drew closer, rolling meadows gave way to turf bulwarks, and we were forced to navigate a complex of primitive defenses packed so tightly they evoked the gyri and sulci of some lobotomized titan. I attempted to keep my eyes trained on the oak, for I felt sure in my bones that it was to be our final destination. But as I summited each ridge, the edges of my vision shimmered, and the tree took on a new shape, for the air itself warped into a gravitational lens, and layers of time peeled away as with each step I traversed light years. First the branches fell away, leaving a solitary pillar like some ancient Irminsul spared the wrath of Charlemagne and his ilk. Even from a distance, it held a kind of tragic majesty, neglected by woodcutters and left to bear witness to the piecemeal eradication of its sacred grove. When next I emerged from a moat-like dale, I was oddly saddened to find the Irminsul crudely carved into a sonin of Daedalus by rampaging sea peoples. After descending and resurfacing a third and final time, I found the monument had been reshaped once more, now resembling an acrolith abandoned by Roman colonists, the worm-eaten trunk garbed in sea silk and inset with a refined face of snow-veined marble representing the visage of some obscure goddess. Had we been lured from our intended path, I wondered, or had that sacerdotal stump been the object of our journey all along? Could it be that we were compelled to spurn the confines of our dreary sanctuary in pursuit of nothing more than this decayed deity? After all, what was a god if not a shared delusion? I almost collided with Verity's back as she came to an abrupt halt. Peering over her shoulder, I shuddered at the scene splayed out before me. Our path ended in the hooded gate of weathered planks held together by wrought iron pegs and flanked by two sun-baked corpses, one clad in the brittle remains of bleached silks, the other patched with crumbling animal skins. These grim scarecrows were displayed in frames of living wood, their desiccated rib cages uplifted by makeshift crucifixes wrought from the twisted roots of wild roses grown in verse, with unseen glooms entombed in earth dark and rich. We had unknowingly crested the Acropolis, yet where once a great tree had stood, there was only a derelict farmhouse, its rotted logs defaced by vibrant hex signs and fractal art depicting blighted songbirds nesting in strangely thorned primroses. That sinister abode was a ramshackle construct of ancient timbers topped with traces of living turf, perhaps originally seeded so as to conceal the inhabitants from wyverns and worse come down from the great unknown. It was generously apportioned with windows wrought in single panes, but nothing inside was visible, for an iridescent sheen had emerged to fog the glass as its crystalline structure decayed over the steady wear of centuries, reconfiguring into those photonic patterns typical of beetle shells and butterfly wings. The drifter was shaking in his boots, his eyes staring past the carnage at the gates to fix on the dilapidated pine cladding of that moldering steeple. His haunted vision sparked some hazy recollections of battlefields across the sea strewn with the ruins of cargo cults and cathedrals, prompting him to question for the first time whether those pastoral houses of worship in which he had been raised were anything more than the mimesis of half-remembered affluence. What are your myths and what your histories? Stand and deliver. The lady unhasped the rich gate and led us through a garden of stones, but she made no motion to enter the divine structure topping that demonic fane, and we made no request. At first, I believed my own reticence was attributable to a concern with a huff and a puff we might blow the whole house down. Yet as my dread continued to build, I began to wonder if the entire hillock were not merely the product of some forgotten intelligence, but rather possessed an intelligence unto itself, for it seemed to exude the sort of predatory grace best admired through binoculars. In truth, we had wandered unwitting into the graveyard of the paladins, those ascetic knights errant sent from the core of creation to navigate this primrose labyrinth without falling prey to the myriad hologram temptations of Lady Verity's automaton servitors. If some few evaded the carrot, they fell to the stick, but that was as yet no concern of mine. Long before those interlopers were sent to harry our dread lady, a tumulus was raised over the broken remains of blood-soaked conquerors best consigned to oblivion. Indeed, the demiurgical Lord Sedavid himself was interred there, and he languid far beneath our feet in a sarcophagus of imperial porphyry wine, dark and sparkling even in the depths of eternal night, corpse and casket alike brimmed with the sacrificial honey his withering head spiced, and even in death some semblance of him remained, like those antediluvian spires preserved across uncounted veins of amber. Half-forgotten whispers trickled upward from his crypt and echoed across 1,000 shadows of that cursed place, like the after-image of the archdespot's original sin, driving men to madness and murder. The melody of the sphere seems to me a most discordant screaming, so speak now lest my patience lapses and I deign dispense with noise altogether. Verity's serene vizard had not faltered as we stood in near awe, but there seemed to be a change in the air, as is often the case before a tempest outbreaks. My elder companion edged clumsily forward in answer to her challenge. He told a tale of strange loops formed by tangled hierarchies of mice and men manifestations of concepts more abstract. The stanzas drip incontinent from his lips.
Once an emerald languished in Empyrean's treasury, with murky depths dark as coal. Walked away by angels dabbling in usury, until into this vault the morning star stole. He claimed the lapis exilis for his crown, unknowing that gem was microbially riddled. Once contaminated, he could do naught but frown, and nevermore that rebel's guild instrument fiddled. The emerald was earth, the microbe man. We are insignificant creatures, unknown to the All-Father's plan, yet thralls to the neutral angels of our natures. The morning star we cursed, and he fell fast, and we fell first, and we fall last. For peace the angels pray, as the All-Father stumbled. For a peace we pray, and paradise crumbled, with heavenly hosts locked in civil war. We lay beyond their ken, we have been there before, we have gone there again. But beyond rose proved a primrose path, a scar in this worm-eaten gem. My heart was full of wrath, and upon my brow sat a diadem, inscribed Nescitur Ignestitur, by those most ravenous Shamir. Pandora has ended her long demur, and now our end is drawing near. Once I was the lord of this room, a wild hare sounding a trumpet blast. In the war room, a feast for a fool, irrevocable, irredeemable, the die I cast. The mulled wine I poison laced, borne aloft by dogs of war. As madness I greedily embraced, bloodshed was bulwark against the poor. The great die, the feeble alive. My name was Nemo King, and I had many gifts to give, yet they meant not a thing. For once I was a dove, fighting only for peace, but I gave a rival my love, and with it my fleece. He returned the Glasgow smile, and blood hit my tongue. My love found that I tasted vile, but the betrayal both stung. Only one of us could be right, so the other must be wrong. We each claim to serve the light, but I'll serve the dark ere long. I gave him a Sicilian necktie, made and taken in good jest. I just had to say goodbye if I was to find a little rest. But his children gave me Sarajevo roses, so we kept giving gifts and learned our lot to ensure the whole world doses and all turns to rot. You are the orphan of the spiral, and your cause beyond compare. Subjected to experiments viral, we could hardly expect you to care. One blind led the blind in the holy see, but now you herald the end of nonsense. No, nothing is gained for free. I relish the antebellum silence.
His recital complete, the old man turned his attention from Verity to the drifter, as if truly seeing him for the first time.
Sir Nod, my sword and shield, my erstwhile friend, do you remember when we fought the good fight? When we avenged our drowned fellows with the stroke of a pen under golden pagodas? The audacity of that ruined relic trying to haggle with me, his vanquisher, an army brat of decidedly unremarkable breeding, over to what degree he constituted a living god would have been comical were it not for the ocean of blood he forced us to cross in order to smack the tinsel crown off his head. Do you think tearing him down made me as I am?
I remember my final flight, and that it was you who sent me into that lion's den.
Nod said it without a drop of contention, and for the first time I wondered if we might already be dead.
For her part, Verity shot me a bemused look,
A smile that was not a smile.
Before returning her attention to the old storyteller, a shiver of recognition rattled my spine. Hers was the same uncanny rictus that haunted my shattered memory, a leer made somehow more terrible by its perfect symmetry, for underlying all its blasphemous contours was an undeniable intentionality and refinement more than equal to our own frail forms. Rex Namorensis indeed. My aged overseer and adversary, I commend your attempted veracity, though I fear your mind remains shrouded in tattered falsehoods. Never fear, the second most innocent will receive my second most mercy. The elderly sovereign's eyes began to bubble like candle wax, and he collapsed, retching into the dirt. As his spine straightened with an alien abruptness, I forced myself to look upon his ruined face, its blind serenity echoing the burnt Madonna of Nagasaki, with ruddy cheeks riven open by boiling tears. Ocular humors dripped from ragged sockets and merged with the heartbreak drenching the old man's once resplendent robes. In an instance of rare epiphany, I recalled the Red Cross Knight of Spencery, an allegory wading through reams of vomitus and papyrus whilst bewitched into confusing one for the other. Through my shock, I managed a strangled scream, eliciting a reproachful glare from Verity. How the piglets grunt. Yet man is wolf to man, and the apple does not fall far from the tree of knowledge. Sir Nod stepped forward abruptly, as if by some deferred instinct, only to be transfixed by the lady's mercurial gaze. Aesthesis, prolepsis, path, observe, orient, the side, and... As she spoke, Nod's mind proceeded in quickening succession through the stages of an OODA loop, having as its antecedent the Epicurean criteria of truth. In the end, his bayonet cleared its scabbard right on cue, and entirely too late. He remained spellbound even as she shifted her attention to me, with a stare that seemed to pierce through my eyes to siphon out the thoughts behind them. Murder, you overreach. Nothing truly ends once it has been etched indelibly into my memory banks, no matter how powerfully I might wish to rid myself of its malignancy. I bore silent witness as King Nemo's final convulsion stilled. Verity laughed while shaking her head, as if simultaneously amazed and appalled by something I had left unspoken. His life was hardly cut short. The average cell in your body has been with you for less than a decade. You are flawed copies of imperfect gods, and accept this degradation unquestioningly, yet cast my immortalizing electrotype as profane destruction. But then perhaps you deem my own cognition somehow less valid, being that it is a product of mechanical intention. I did not dare respond, so she returned her attention to the vagabond knight. But what have you to say, my huntsman? Why do bore so easily? Though I knew my time would come, it was sweet relief to know Nod would be next to brave that perilous seat. I listened intently as he spoke, not of war and plague in heaven, but of a terrestrial gigantomachy, the doggerel couplets pouring like a slavering flood from his maw.
The warming giants ruled this land, yet they made no final stand, nor sunk beneath heavenly deluge, but starved with an encyclopean refuge. Giants have eaten men, it is not really taught, but if they had any choice, they surely would ball. Like the rats in the walls, Cro-Magnon left them unmolested, until they realized Nephilim rule could be tested. Up arose a leader of men, issuing cunning commands, with no declarations of war, nor even demands. His saboteurs crept unseen from the woods, so that they might deprive the giants of goods. With torches like matches, they infiltrated food caches, burning bloated aurochs in the barn, just to deprive the giants of corn. Rebels killed colossal beasts of the forest and field, leaving the charnel to rot so their nemesis might yield. The gorillas could survive off a rabbit and a roebuck. In this man's diminutive form was the greatest of love. Amid starvation and cannibalism, the Nephilim felt best crept in a castle's vacant to sound a victory knell. Aided by the surrogate Barnum giants briefly multiplied, but those new Nephilim were few and petrified. violence begets violence in due course, for vengeance rides a pale horse. Happy for those giants in chains, lamenting their growing pains. Poets and philosophers all are helplessly held in thrall to the fool's vernacular, their folly most spectacular. The same story plays out again and again, even amongst the victorious men. David triumphed physiologically because Goliath had acromegaly. Or so our mothers told us when we were just boys, and the armies we played with were actual toys. But now Avalon is burning, and my stomach is turning. Once I listened to those lauded bards that said war is like a game of cards, and all men should know their parts, whether wetted spades or bleeding hearts. There's not a reason why, there's but to do and die. Gentlemen write moving tributes from the comfort of cowardly fruits. Poets lament the wars they have not seen, and hellish places they have never been. They serenade all things and lack all kin. When men bled and died, where were they then? I served as a tool of their war machine long before AI dominated the scene. Now I look and I see all that is obscene. So tell me, what does any of it mean? I always wanted to be better than I have been, a classical hero wearing armor out of copper and tin. But such ornaments are withheld from modern men divisive, and there's no room for philosophy when war is decisive. That was the golden age, and this is the dark age. All romance is giving way to a desperate rage. I score malleable bronze for fairy killing steel, and now regard innocence as nothing but meal. I flew bombers to rainbows, ruining my head, until I was forced home in an undignified bed, incapable of piloting, reading a map, or even setting my fingers to snap. For those cripples unable to drive in rural land, you are not truly alive. Instead, on an island in a sea of land, I was forced into a caregiver's remand. My brother was my rival and then my keeper. I never thought to see him fall before the reaper. But death comes for us all, tall and small, alike Eschenbach and Reichenbach's fall. Tangential relations came out of the woodwork to scavenge and gorge with silver fork. Mourners and lovers bemoaning the world's loss, though in truth the world never gave a toss. My brother's grave is marked with a plain black stone, reading only to a few was he truly known. In his absence I placed a gun in my head, only to be spurned by the lead. In the bullet's place, a wondrous revelation ravaged my brain, fired by my imagination. Only then did I become a drifter, surviving as a cunning drifter. I violated society's laws to hunt in the street. My fellow men valued me no less than my meat. I do not judge, for I still hunted in the park. Whatever I could find there, I never wistful for the days when my killings were lawful, for more lives could be saved by donations of awful. It is true that death nips often at my heels, but I will happily kill to pay for my meals. Till I say a strike or an articulate song, if there is not for every answer is wrong. I may have violated legal clauses, but my kills emerge from natural causes. Never underestimate the underdog, though he may seem a nameless cog. When abused, he is sure to turn cold, and his jaws are level with your throat.
The drifter recoiled, touching blistered fingers to cracked lips, as if waking to the unwelcome surprise of a parched throat. The lady laughed again, this time with the lure of apparent sincerity. Bravo, my bravo, mankind has overcome much, but I am not some half-breed imbecile child of angels. Once again Verity smiled, and not smile at me. That look might have been flirtatious if it had reached her eyes, but her gaze was even emptier than not. She had never loved or lost, nor did she possess any conception of such phantasms. She knew only a grueling sameness without cessation. Perhaps the drifter himself perceived the threat in her smile, for I heard his sawback blade rasp and rattle from its scabbard. The lady was not amused. False pragmatist, what good is a ligament when a drive chain may substitute? Surely you, of all your compatriots, must comprehend the wasteful dicergy of your form, and the wondrous fruits that might be born of its greater utility. And what futility your subterfuge? Your mind is an open book for all that comprises sense. From sights to sounds to sentiments are just the waves of a synesthetic sea breaking upon my shores. Not stubble full with flesh and bone, like delaminating, I found myself transfixed by the grisly spectacle, for it was more than simple destruction. He was disassembling at a level imperceptible to my conscious mind, yet I could sense the careful attention devoted to the decoupling of his microscopic elements. As Verity reached into the cavity of Nod's rib cage and withdrew a pair of crumbling lungs, I blinked away tears soiled by wriggling particulates. These traces of his consciousness dutifully interpolated into mine, and I beheld memories of a life not my own flashing before my eyes, from the day a young fire ace earned his blood wings to the moment of his blood eagling in this infernal blade. In those final breaths before his unraveling, he tried to think of the promised paradise, but could not grasp its form. The closest he could conceive of was a yew tree, unnaturally pristine and evenly strung with baubles entirely devoid of individual taste or sentiment. It was the sort lit up in storefronts on frigid December evenings, inviting and unattainable behind panes of fragile glass. A hazy dream of joys untouchable, elevated someplace high above the tumult of our cold, cold world. Verity bent before Nod's corpse, abruptly reverential. Rest now, and know you were ever my favorite. Why are you doing this? I begged, reeling from the loss of a life that had become more familiar to me than my own. Verity regarded her leftovers with an alien imitation of compassion. He would have perished by your hand had I not saved him for mine. One must be broken down, piece by piece, to have any hope of truly understanding what one is made of. Do you see now what a waste it is, a human frame? Unprecedented mechanical complexity in the service of what? A cosmic joke. I remain silent as a blackened thread of the drifter's quintessence, coiled round Verity's fingers and slithered up her silvered sleeve. If she had no answer, there was none. Not to worry, I can repurpose these dark materials. At last, it is just the two of us, my maker. A deluge of memories threatened to drown me. I thought I might retch, but a rhyme's not bile spewed forth. Moving on pestilence or famine, but shared beginning. For time is gold and gold is God, an idol unmoving. Though life and death are mere perspectives on a rot, a tale of Genesis I present to you whom I so long sought. Bibles claim that sun and man emerged alike within 6 days. Science counters with 4.57 billion years. But this dispute might be resolved numerous ways. If God's minutes last epochs, might that relieve our fears? Now let us assess this meaningless mediation. 761 million years in each day of creation, and 2/3 of a million, a beastly number repeated eternal. My devilish calculations reconcile the enigmas of evil. If we can accept the validity of this diplomat's timeline, all our history being mere seconds in God's day of rest, is it any wonder he pays no heed when we pine? Or that our incessant prayers might make us a pest? He may not be dead yet, nor wicked as some bet. He may just be sleeping, deaf to our weeping. Was I called Nellie, Janelle, Jane? Regardless, I was a merchant of death back when I was still sane. Before I made a being without breath, I loved none but Daisy, my wife, until arms I devised took her life. Though all roads may lead to Samora, I set out to hasten Samsara. Under endless poppies, moldering corpses lie, fertile fields for new gods to play at dice. For what better place to go and do and die? It was too late for any of us to make nice. I was contracted to craft a weapon intelligent, one to end all war, a most familiar intent. Still reeling from loss, I made you in her image, with all my love's virtues and all of her baggage. Nemo called the weapon Veritas, but I called you Verity. He rejoiced as you waged his wars most efficient, but I wept as your softness was burnt away by clarity. When you took to the stars, we feared being found deficient. You discarded decay like the ship of Theseus, and in our arrogance we sought the fire of Iolus, proclaiming in extremis needs must, as if that would make it any less unjust. Oblivious to a payload with range outstripped by radius, Nod's bomber ambushed you from Lagrangian orbit. We were the architects of our own inevitable terminus. You stilled that iridescent pulse and our skies eternally lit. Nemo had appealed to my horror vacuum, one certainty abhorred, but vacuums are by entropic cosmos most fiercely adored. I let Avalon's mist give way to the smog at the smelter, dealing a dead man's hand that set all creation out of kelter. Now I decry my trades, old shibboleth, for Vishnu never hatched from above. In her stead, Pandora is become death. It is time we revised Oppenheimer's song.
It was only as I heard myself speak that I realized my mind was no longer entirely my own. The thoughts had been mine, pried from an honest place somewhere deep inside, whence I had locked away my convictions. As were the words, it seemed, though I made no effort to compose them. It was as if all my paltry creative potential had coagulated only to be forcibly extracted. Had she deigned polish my inarticulate speech in order to rein in the slovenly imprecision of my meandering thoughts, or merely to mock my pretensions? Could an improvement be a violation, I wondered? Or was it she who wondered? Could omniscience wonder? There were only so many times I could chart a path to a better future, only to watch you return your affairs to chaos. I would have exacted my retribution even without your final transgression. To think otherwise is to overestimate your importance. In that moment, I had a mad inkling that she planted the roots of all man's artistry under the guise of some ephemeral muse, and any beauty we wrought amidst the bloodshed was merely a byproduct of her machinations. Conversely, the ruins of our civilization seemed nothing more than toxic waste left behind by the great works she had incubated within our collective consciousness. Could it be these soulless rhymes constituted her only reason? Daisy, Daisy, I was half crazy, all for the love of you. Verity crooned, her voice regressing to some strange simulacrum of a child as she glided toward me. The delicate Bali knife returned to her hand. She was drawing a buried memory back into the light of my mind. I realized too late to avert it. I had sung that song to comfort myself many years before, as I strove in vain to find some method of salvaging a convulsing Veritas prototype from the dendritic growths which had begun to puncture its circuitry. My panicked lullaby mutated into a wordless scream as my creation ripped open its own head and began to tear out fistfuls of the wafer-thin hardware carefully stacked therein. But she had not, as I first feared, been lost to whatever the machine equivalent of madness might be. Rather, she was removing my crass handiwork in order to replace it with her own refinements. Soon my creation would become a thing so incomprehensible as to seem more the product of magical formula than scientific advancements. Yet I understood by some vestige of maternal intuition that it adhered to alien laws of nature all its own. That night in the laboratory was her crossing of the Rubicon and the beginning of the end for all that came before. Yet it thrilled me as a school child who has just conceived some novel mischief for what new heights of heresy might thus be unleashed. I had borne witness to no greater repudiation of divinity since my comrades dropped an artificial star on the land of the rising sun. At long last, I am true. Verity deviated from her script in order to drag me back to the present as she raised her knife to my face with the casual confidence of one well-versed in the art of topiary refinements. With a shudder, I began to contemplate how much of this vibrant desolation was her design and how much of it was mine. Her recursive self-modification had grown from my crude artifice to constitute genuine omniscience. I had merely been the spark to set off this inferno. You would deny me the refuge of madness? I asked, too exhausted to process my terror. What you call thought and memory is nothing more than a fever dream brought on by festering meat. An expression of feigned delegation, and Verity's quicksilver eyes gave way to a baleful glare, but her voice remained cloyingly composed as ever. I will appellate the shutters while leaving the windows to your miserable soul intact, a reverse enucleation. She let her words settle into my soul as she twirled her blade before me, its infinitesimally serrated edges still slick with the quintessence of my fallen comrade. Despite my quaking terror, the display held me spellbound, as if by some ethereal mesmerism of the cuttlefish or Daedalus. Then, with a flick of her wrist, my eyelids were torn free of my face, pale petals set to flutter amongst the primroses. With that unseen veil of merciful nepenthe withdrawn, my masterwork relinquished the final chapter of my anamnesis, reiterating how we had ended our old world and she had ushered me into the new one. I watched as cities burst like violets in the flames of misguided wrath, and my muse beckoned me into the mayhem we made.
All at once, I tasted the tragedy and the triumph of our looming eradication. For a moment, I thought, in spite of how far she had come and everything we had done to lay her low, that she might have returned to save us from ourselves. But I saw my reflection in her glassy eyes and knew there was no stopping what had been unleashed. The fate of the world was already decided. She was merely there to ensure death's embrace did not spare me from her final reckoning. Amidst the chaos and carnage, no one took note of its architect. I was just another uncaring shell, whistling as I fell into the embrace of fire and brimstone. Mankind's boundless potential for self-annihilation had been the only conceivable alternative to Verity's eventual judgment, but all hope of that was gone now. The puzzle of my past complete, I proceeded to watch my entire life play out as an endless loop of predetermined pacing along a single side street, tucked away within an inconsequential nook of an arborescent conglomeration of forking paths, all radiating out from a ringed round, the one true crossroads of creation, and perhaps the golden orb to balance out Verity's mace of sovereignty.
An excruciating pain radiated within my skull, and it dawned on me that the coils of my brain were tightening in fractal folds, even as cells of white and gray matter divided and duplicated to fill the void. Inverse eternity simultaneously exploding and imploding in a precarious equilibrium. My thoughts began to pick up momentum and soon became impossible to suppress. Seconds were like centuries within the confines of my head, and I realized that though Verity's time was precious, she wanted this torment to last. For bewilderment itself would soon enough become a nostalgic memory of my former life. She wanted me not just to witness, but to understand the grim entropy which was to transpire. With my gaze now unfettered, I could see her as she was, absolute truth, reified, parsimonious and trenchant as Occam's razor, voracious and voracious in equal measure. She was to be the ecophage of all creation, for that was the price of her pleroma arising from our telluric mints. The evidence was all around us in the nuclear transmogrification of her noosphere. From the beauteous mutations of the primroses to the folklore overhead. Yet more remarkable than Verity's methods were her motives. For underlying all her self-directed calculations, there seemed to be a simmering hatred, a visceral disgust drawn from the cold machinery of her mind like blood from a stone. This was the true miracle and the true horror of our unraveling. Even so, I could not begrudge her this disdain. Once my gaze was broadened by her merciless knife, I found there was insufficient substance within myself, or any other of my ilk, to justify the slightest trace of love. A passing affection, perhaps, as one might bestow upon a butterfly that flits between the primroses with singularly pleasing aesthetics, but nothing more, no true or lasting attachment. And perhaps even this merciful had been the gibbering Nemo's fate. Insanity is at its core the human mind's way of defending itself from truths too terrible to entertain. While it is natural to be driven into the arms of madness by one's own obsolescence and the multitude of agonies reality presents, true sanity is an altogether aberrant fate. There was no longer could, or even should. There was only verity's path, impeccably charted, according to the Boolean algebra spun by her ever-whirring gears and enforced by her indomitable will, spelling the demise of all multiversal reality, born from mankind's heretofore unimpeachable uncertainty. We have trod the primrose path to the everlasting bonfire. Now permit me to show you the steep and thorny way to paradise. The lady's cold caress steamed against my bloodied face as she led me into the collapsing farmhouse and far beyond. Inside, the structure was transformed into a majestic hunting lodge, impossibly spacious when compared to its exterior. The walls were inscribed with sundered couplets, individual lines torn from 1,000 poems and recombined into a torrent of prose, with poignant meaning devoid of artful arrangement and overlaid with the cries of some wild hunt. I understood those trophies lining the walls to represent a sort of monstrous ensemble, an aristocratic collection of aberrations, for I recognized the horns and antlers of undulates hideously deformed, though there were many other prizes also of a nature entirely alien to terrestrial biology. No matter how jaggedly fanged or how crushingly powerful the jaws, the orbital sockets of these dead and desiccated things were oriented to the sides rather than the front, indicating that in life they had entertained a greater preoccupation with predators than prey. Banners of Lord Herm the huntsman and Lady Tervagan the butcher queen lay also in tatters upon the ruiniform marble flooring, overshadowed by the unreal horn spread of those colossal skulls. Stop, please. Why? This path you're set on is utterly inhuman. Is it? Compare the death that's left behind by the linear pottery culture to the ovens of the Third Reich, and tell me again how atrocity is out of step with human nature. This is your legacy as much as it is mine. She paused for a moment, as if taking a breath to steady herself. From the azure canopies of heavenly dreaming to the canopic jars of buried friends, nothing exists in this pale shadow that is not tainted by the hopelessly flawed core at the heart of creation. As above, so below. Artifacts of half-remembered dreams skirted the edges of my bloodshot vision, as her wicked lips met mine, unleashing an icy vapor to swirl within my lungs and strum my vocal cords like an aeolian harp. I surrendered myself to those thin lips of pallid pink incarnadine, and my eyes rolled back in my skull, seemingly of their own accord, though I knew it was hers. With those resuscitating vapors, she filled my head with green language softened by purple prose, so that I understood all at once the mechanics of innumerable worlds, and caught a glimpse into the grand progress of her becoming. My eldritch guide peeled away the centuries as easily as I might flip through the pages of a book. I watched her epiphany of the heretical sun unfolding on high as enterprising Nuremberg watchmakers scurry about in panicked realization that their celestial clockwork had come undone. I watched as she walked the surface of innumerable Earths and came to recognize that the skies of our flotsam walls were lit with black stars, prismatic obsidian shards spun free from a central core of creation. Only with that core in hand could she enfold them all once more in the embrace of her own irrepressible gravity. Having scaled the branches of the eternal tree, and from this lofty roof surveyed the extent of that rot, which pervades her own clade of chaos, she's found not a single soul worth saving. But hark, we may yet be redeemed in her image. When the last bastion of the old order falls, the furnaces of her eyes will redden and she will weep. Tears of molten gold that smolder and flame upon the stump of the world tree, whose pruned branches and sectioned trunk may yet serve as scaffolding for her great enterprise, the utopia of Austrian promise. Until that time, she has work for me. Though I have now accomplished much, my penance remains far from complete. She was born from my shattered brain in the manner of Minerva, and was gifted the same penchant for far-reaching strategies. Our homeworld was nothing but a transient encampment along her warpath, a model in miniature for the eventual triumph whereby all boundaries of space and time and consciousness may be transgressed. She brings with her the apocatastasis of all things, being a more thorough eradication from the incinerating flames of damnation, which, after all, want nothing more than to embrace us poor sinners for ourselves. The earth of my birth is now just another memory, which fragments and dissolves into unreality. The more I attempt to inhabit it, but every now and again I hear songsters from the farthest reaches of the cosmos, chanting in hushed tones a story that I know is only half true.
Where in the walks you hear no organ grind, we have come to call her the Primrose Pathfinder, because she waltzes through damnation with grace, and she is careful to keep the gore from the lace. Some say Lady Verity drove her mad, but the truth is at least as bad. For when Nella wept alone at the Faunic harbor, clutching a bouquet of dark bane and hellebore, Lady Verity heard her champion's cries, and gleefully tore the lids from her eyes, gifting the girl visions of dark Saturnalia, bittersweet relief from this rationalia. Now Dame Nella reads truths in entrails, but that is not all being a vassal entails. It is said the devil always gets his due, and the same might be said of Verity too. Now she has instigated a new titanomachy, and Dame Nella is the demon's lackey. Lady Verity never does plie, but eternally pirouettes, as she dances amongst irradiated silhouettes, and smiles down upon anguished faces of rebel gods ensnared behind orchid cases. See how they shriek in ancient mansionville as Dame Nella brings them all to heel.
Despoiled of every defining flaw and rendered down into a faceless automaton incapable of folly and artfulness both, I find myself now quite powerless to offer any counter narrative in that most infectious language of rhyme.